and I'll get the AI going so that at least we have some notes if people want to read them. Yeah. Oh, Dean has come in. Good. So let's wait a second for him. So, well, once he joins us, we'll get started. Hey, good to see you, Dean. Can you hear me, Dean?
Good morning. Yeah, just
Ah,
signed on here now. Thank you.
good, great to have you here, and hope that situation back home is going as well as possible, as it
Yeah,
can.
thank you very much. Appreciate that, John.
Sure, yeah, and glad to have you here despite everything. So today's, I would say, probably the most important session of the course in that we do get into the regenerative leadership framework, and hopefully, I don't know if you have been able to watch the recording of the presentation. I will go through it briefly just to make sure that we touch on some of the main points. But I wanted to start off with asking a question of you. Is there anything that you've done in the past week from reading the materials or the framework itself that has sparked a question in you? Do you have any questions that you'd like to have clarified about any of the materials you've seen, particularly the framework? So just to open it up to you guys, what have you seen, and what puzzles you, what interests you, what surprised you, if anything? Don't be shy. We're all learning here together, so whatever you share is important. Your voice is as important. Mine is certainly the least important here.
Well, I am still catching up, so I can't say that I have an opinion as yet.
Okay, that was smart. Okay, well, if the we obviously can go through and pick up on questions as we go. Would you like me to do a quick review of the framework and where it comes from, just to make sure that the moving parts are all clear to you? Okay. Hi, Amanda. I see you joining by phone, so welcome. And let's take a look at this. So let me just pull up a couple of things. Let me share my screen. So the intent of this week is for you to begin to incorporate, as we say here, we're looking at the qualities and the skills of the regenerative leader. So this is what we really want to drill down into, because the thing I would emphasize as really important is working on the how. So I've asked you to start thinking about what you'd like to do and why you want to do it with regard to a project that has some sort of rich regenerative principles attached to it. And that's why I asked you to watch the Majora Carta video, which does help us see how these abstractions actually operate in a real person, and to learn from that to see how these transfer to your own leadership style, to your own approach to things, and to see how you can turn that into or translate that into things that you can apply to yourselves. So the idea is from the qualities, skills, and behaviors of regenerative leaders, then to turn those into actions for obviously for change to happen. So with that said, let me pull up the presentation very briefly. And so there are a couple of things here. We talked about this last week about what is the underlying cause. We talked about what it was, and I use this from Einstein, the idea that we can't possibly use the old ways of thinking or ways of thinking that no longer work for us. And trying to repeat the old ways of doing and thinking really, obviously, is not working for us. So we need to find the will to actually be willing to go back to the drawing board, back to square one, to reinvent everything that we do and how we do it. And that's maybe something that might be extreme, but the whole intent here is to suspend everything we think that we know, because clearly something's not working. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in the situation we are in today. There's something going on that is not helping us take the next step to creating a society that where everybody can thrive, where everybody can flourish, where everybody is safe, where everybody has access and opportunity to live a meaningful life. Something is not working. And the global initiatives like the United Nations or USAID, all of these obviously are not working either. They might help in moments of crisis and emergency by providing whatever is needed in terms of helping people save their lives. But as soon as we get beyond emergencies, how do we help people empower themselves to do what they want to do to live fulfilling lives? And we can't do that by applying the old ways of thinking. And I think that is quite logical. So, how do we go from this image of us trashing our planet, from this linear model of Homo sapiens means wise person, and wisdom seems to be something that we're missing. So how do we get from there, from that linear model of thinking to thinking again in systems? And systems thinking, of course, is one of the key principles of understanding and being conscious of the implications of every decision we make. If we can't factor in every implication of every decision that we make all the time, there will be unintended or unanticipated consequences. And today we don't have the luxury to actually learn through trial and error. We've lost that time. We no longer have that luxury. We need to get wiser and smarter from the get-go. And that's why I insist so much on working on process rather than trying to get something done. So we need to move from the local, because I think it was Amanda wrote this morning about the alliances that are no longer working in the world, the big ones. And so therefore we need to work at the local level. That's why you are powerful. Because if you apply some of these principles, I can guarantee that the way you connect with other people will allow you to make positive change happen that will benefit everything and everybody. And this is obviously the purpose. And if we can do this, and in the framework, we'll see how that is done, and the process, if we go from something small and as perfect as we can make it, and then scale it up, and this is what we call going from the prototype, that this is your project. Your project is the prototype of regenerative leadership. If that is great, if that is well done, if the design is, I would say, correct, then you will be able to scale that up in ways that will not have unintended consequences. So these, again, are fairly abstract principles, but we need to move away from everything we do based on reason and logic. Reason and logic and mathematics and our understanding of the world and physics as a linear system, like the assembly line of a factory, or what we do with the materials in the earth of the planet, is no longer working. This idea of taking things out of the earth, and Giselle, your case with your job, producing something and then seeing what on earth do we do with what the waste we're creating, we can no longer continue just to keep on throwing things away because there's no longer enough space, there's no longer enough raw materials. We need to find a way to actually go away from the take, make, waste society into integrated systems. And you've already heard of things like cluster industries, where Giselle, I don't know if you have partnerships or alliances with the other industries where your waste is their product or their raw material, and vice versa. You create these circular systems where nothing is wasted, where everything actually is reused and actually no longer recycled but upcycled. So those products that are created new are better than the ones that became waste. And that's a real challenge. So the idea is, here's the mantra of sustainability, which is no use any longer, because we can't just do this. We need to find a way of, and regeneration talks about restoring systems that are damaged first, and then redesigning everything we do with new systems in order to replace the old systems with new ones. And so the systems that we create or design are also part of your project. So this is your work, to design a process, a system that will actually scale up perfectly without unanticipated consequences. And that's not easy. And so that's where we go into this, the theory of change of regenerative leadership. And again, very simple. Our behaviors are only as good as the consciousness that drives them. So if we are flawed in how we think, in what we know, and believe that we know, our behaviors are going to be a reflection, will reflect that level of awareness, that level of consciousness. And so we can't change the behaviors until we change the way we think or feel or are. And that's what I call the internal operating system, which is, of course, our mind and our hearts. That, if we can do that, that's what will help us use our hands in much better ways. And so that internal operating system is what is focused on in the framework. And so this is the refocus of everything we think we know and going beneath everything we have learned into that purer, potentially more creative self that can actually begin to see things from a different perspective and without the contamination of the lenses through which we look at reality. And that takes a shift in attitude. Instead of looking outwards about what can I do to solve problems, it's about looking inwards to see, well, who am I? And that's why my motto is we need to redefine ourselves before we can redesign what we do. And redefining ourselves means going into the heart. And then that visualization we did last week, for example, seeing what you might want to leave behind as your legacy is the consequence of your consciousness applied from now till then, so that your legacy is perfect. It is it's clearly aligned with the contract that you took out when you were born. This is what we call the life contract. And are you fulfilling that contract? And that your consciousness or our consciousness actually resonates. When we're fulfilling the contract, we have joy and happiness and engagement and enthusiasm. We're motivated. When we're not fulfilling the contract, we have regret, we have remorse, we have guilt, we have all of these other very low frequency emotions that tell us that we're out of harmony with ourselves. So how do we get into balance with ourselves? And that's will be then reflected in our work. And so here, this is what I call this, and in the PowerPoint, I actually go through all of this in steps. When we are, and I call here, you can see this in blue, probably not very well, the regressive cycle, where our own purpose is not strong, we are inevitably dependent on others to tell us what to do. Until we find our own personal purpose, and that helps drive everything that we do, we are trapped in a regressive cycle. Something brings us down where we are dependent on others for purpose. Once we connect to a purpose, then we wake up. We suddenly discover our intention, that there is something that we want to do. And that discovery is essential if you're going to do a project that's based on a real purpose. And again, what I was just mentioning at the beginning with Giselle is that purpose can get lost in the numbers. How do you bring that back and keep that alive, even if you're working on the numbers? How do you create that balance? Intention actually then allows us to engage, to actually do things, to engage ourselves and to engage with others. And that engagement leads to empowerment, to feeling that courage where the project, that purpose is bigger than me, where I then have less fear to share my purpose with others. And that is a huge thing, because that allows us to think about being able to live a fulfilling life. And that's how, by doing this journey, which nobody else can do for us, you can actually reach that summit of the mountain, which is our legacy. When you can look back and look down on everything you've done and say, I've done something where I'm leaving my place better than where I found it. And that's the idea of connecting to that purpose. But of course, my purpose is not as important as your purpose. And so the big challenge for leaders is, how do I help all people connect to their purpose? And how do I help everybody align their purpose into a shared purpose? That's the work of the regenerative leader. And that's what we look at here in the framework. And so the qualities of the regenerative leader, which in my case emerged from the research that I conducted in leaders in business, in government and education, universities, municipalities, on what actually helped them lead an organization towards higher and higher degrees of sustainability. All of those concepts that they shared are what I've collected here. And in the framework, if you can see, there are 4 quadrants here. You see the little arrows, and the 4 quadrants are divided into 4 dimensions. And these 4 quadrants are actually based on the work of Ken Wilber, who's an important American philosopher who lives in Boulder. And he developed integral psychology and wrote a wonderful book called The Theory of Everything. And then he has a great concept where he uses these quadrants in what he calls all quadrants at all levels, but I won't get into that. But if you're interested in Ken Wilber, certainly is somebody that you might be interested in reading. So the 4 quadrants are divided into different dimensions of our consciousness. Beneath this field of emerging consciousness and empowerment is what I call the interior world of us, our conscious world, both on the left of us as an individual, and then of us as an organization or a collaborative or community, a company, whatever it is. So quadrants 1 and 3 are about the consciousness of individuals or groups. Whereas above the field of consciousness is the behaviors of individuals and of organizations. So if you understand that, these 4 quadrants in conceptually, then you can very quickly see very simply what I found from the leaders that I studied and worked with is that they have some personal qualities in their consciousness. And so when people ask me about consciousness, they say, well, I don't know about consciousness. I'm not a psychologist. But I can say that people who have been highly successful in moving their organizations to a better degree of sustainability have demonstrated these qualities. One is what I've already mentioned, this awakening to something bigger than themselves, where they've connected to something really important. They've also had the capacity internally to be creative. They've moved away just from using logic and reason to incorporating other human faculties. How often in groups, Giselle, I'm throwing this at you, or Dean, when you meet with people, how often do you invite emotions or values or creativity or imagination or intuition as a real factor in making the best decisions? How often do we use a rational model with an agenda where there is very often items on the agenda that were determined by the person that facilitates the meeting, not by everybody who participates in the meeting? And by the time we get to the last item on the agenda, everybody's sick and tired of the meeting. They want to get back to watching TV or whatever it is they want to do, because there's been nothing energizing or engaging. So it's just dull reporting or instructing people what they need to do rather than creating a conversation around something where we all share a common purpose. And that common purpose cannot be in response to fear. This is another key insight. It has to be in response to love. So we need to engage each other by welcoming in not a reaction to something that threatens us, but to something bigger that actually drives our behavior towards something more, so we say, more aligned with being loving and caring and interested in the well-being and the welfare of the people who are around us. And these are things that come from creative intelligence, from systems thinking, understanding that unfortunately, rationally, and Giselle, going back to you, we cannot think systems thinking is really a paradox. We cannot think in systems. Computers might get close with modeling, But systems are something we sense. We know when we make a decision or take an action that is going to have a negative impact on the system. We won't know, very likely, we won't know how to measure the impact, but we do know that if we do this rather than that, the impact is going to be negative. And that's not system thinking, that's system sensing. And if we go back to the wisdom of uh, Native American communities like the Iroquois, I don't know if you probably heard the phrase of the idea of thinking 7 generations into the future. Before taking one action, we must discuss what are the implications of that decision for 7 generations down the road. So again, long-term thinking, which we'll get into. Then global ethics is a very simple term. This is what I was saying before. My purpose is very powerful, but yours is as important as mine. Global ethics is learning how to balance my self-interest with the rights and interests of everybody else and everything else. So that global ethics is just simply what I'm doing. Is it only selfish and self-interested, or is it, am I satisfying my own needs and aspirations, which are as legitimate as anybody else's, but also considering the impact that my actions will have on the quality of life of others? So do I ignore what the effects will be of the actions that I take, or do I consider them and incorporate them in the design of my decisions? And that is global ethics. And emerging futures is being able to consider the future is coming, we don't know what it is, but we know that if we cannot visualize desirable futures, it's highly unlikely we'll be able to design plans that will actually get to those desirable futures. So these are the inner qualities of the regenerative leader. Any questions? Does this make sense? So if we can connect to these qualities, and again, these are not exhaustive, there's many more, but these are the ones that really were shared and came through more strongly. And I'm sure we could probably find others like empathy and all sorts of other things. However, these are the ones that were certainly shared. These qualities and all our inner qualities are the ones that impact our behaviors. And that's where this field of emerging consciousness and empowerment comes from. That's the soil or the earth where our consciousness, if that soil is nutritious and healthy, is going to produce fruit and flowers and vegetables and not weeds. Our consciousness inevitably will produce above ground, that is in the world of the visible, the world of physics and our behaviors, things that reflect our consciousness. So with these qualities, what I found was that the behaviors of regenerative leaders were these. One, they had purpose-driven leadership. We find that in the most powerful spiritual leaders like Martin Luther King or Gandhi, but I'm sure there are more practical, down-to-earth leaders that we can find, of people who are driven by purpose and yet who seem to find that they can engage other people in a shared purpose. So that Martin Luther King's dream was shared by so many people. Why? Because there was something in his messaging that actually connected to people's hearts, not to their heads. And therefore, they actually drive change from within, not from telling people what they should do. A dream is an impossible thing to do, but it's a wonderful thing to share. So, what is your dream? And how do you bring that dream to fruition with others? By sharing with others. And how do you actually make that happen? Well, the skills of regenerative leaders is they're willing to observe who is doing everything better than I am. And that's what we call iterative observation. So any of you, if you're in a field where you have other people who do something similar that are getting better results, there is no shame in going and asking them, how do you do what you do? And what can I do to make my thing better? So the iterative observation, going and looking at the best models that you can find that will help you build your own project and your own approach. And you can only do that if you learn how to do deep listening. And this goes back to the Personal Leadership Action Plan. And active listening is part of this, but deep listening is, can you listen to people's hearts, not to their words? Do you look at people in the eye when you speak with them? Are you fully present in that conversation? Are you not just waiting for them to stop talking for you to tell them what you think, rather than actually identifying together something that we share here, that we can build into something bigger than you or me, or you plus me? And as you bring in other people and you engage them in that conversation, then that purpose actually gets bigger and shared and can grow. And that's the other skill of regenerative leaders, the ability to engage multiple different types of stakeholders. So whether you're working with an affluent community, a highly diverse community, you're working with different races, genders, political ideologies, there are people who, for some reason, are able to speak to the most ignorant, least educated people in their language, and to the most sophisticated or powerful in their language. They are able to communicate at all levels and somehow to bring them into the conversation so that everybody has an equal voice. And that's one of the things that Majora Carter in her video at the end actually shares with Al Gore, in this case in her TED Talk. Multiple or multi-stakeholder engagement is a key to regeneration. We must consider not just who is in our organization, who are our clients, but who are even indirectly affected by the decisions that we make, which in sustainability is what we call externalities. How do the products that we make affect the well-being and the health of people who are not even directly connected to us in the community? So with chemical plants, of course, toxic chemicals that go into the water systems affect people who don't even buy our chemicals. Those are external. So there are unintended consequences way beyond the inner circle of who we are in our organization, our customer base or our client base, and then everybody else across the planet. And if we start talking about quantum physics, the idea, if you're familiar with the butterfly effect, that every decision we make affects everything else on the planet in time. So these are the skills of the regenerative leader. Now, the regenerative leader, notice I go from quadrant 2 to quadrant 3. They don't tell people what to do. They engage in these activities with their organization, fostering that collective purpose through that generative conversation. So your task for the project is to design your type of generative conversational dialogue. Who are you going to talk to first? How are you going to talk to them? How are you going to invite them in to participate in designing the solution before you even start taking actions? How can you do that without an agenda? Well, you do that with a question, not with an agenda. And the question is, what is the most important thing that concerns us here today for all of us? So if you think about that question that you'd like to ask anybody with whom you want to engage for a project, think about that question. Formulating that question might be the most important first step you can take for any project. And these are two very simple concepts. They look big, like big terms, but transconceptual dynamics goes to this idea of we've got to get out of just using logic and reason. We need to incorporate other things. So a regenerative leader invites people's whole person in, their emotions, their values, their beliefs, their concerns, their imagination, their creativity. We need all human faculties to be brought to bear in order to identify solutions. We're not going to come up with a real plan, with a strategic plan that will actually be successful. The strategic plans are riddled with unintended consequences. And I'll show you why. And triple loop learning is another simple concept that comes from the organizational leadership theory. Single loop learning is the assembly line, the factory assembly line. We manufacture something, a car, we get it off the assembly line, we take it down to do a test drive, the wheels come off, oh, something's not right. We go back, we fire the person, put on the the wheels, or we make sure that they tighten the wheels correctly, and we could try the car again off the lot, and it works. The system is fine. That's the linear system, that's single loop learning. No questioning, no idea that there's something might be better or something's not working. Double loop learning is where we begin to say, well, why are we doing this way? Aren't there possible better ways for us to do it? Triple loop learning is understanding that we need to rethink everything, not only that we do, but we need to rethink who we are. So triple loop learning is understanding that we must be different before we do something differently. And that's a real challenge. And a regenerative leader encourages the dialogue or a conversation around we need to become different. So, Giselle, I hate going back to you because you opened up the topic. How do you go back and say, everything we're doing is fine, however, it's not enough. We need to become different. We need to be joyful in the work that we do. We need to become creative together. It can't all be on your shoulders and the shoulders of just one or two or three people in your company that actually do everything and then scrape by. It's how does everybody get involved in this vision of a better world, where everybody is working for social justice, for equity, for community impact, for environmental prosperity and fulfillment, so that there are all these other strings to sustainability and regeneration that we might not be considering as we design the solutions. And so, if a leader can get the organization talking in this way, then it becomes possible for the organization to behave in these ways, up at the top in quadrant 4. And backcasting is the fulfillment of the desirable emerging futures. Can we create a plan that actually considering the result 200 years in the future? What are the consequences of what we want to do 150 or 200 years in the future? What society do we see that far in the future? And that's where people stop thinking about stuff. They start thinking about people and living things and prosperity and fulfillment and joy and happiness and love rather than flying cars or zero emissions or zero waste to landfill. These are all things which obviously will happen if we realize that what we want to see in the future truly is a society and a planet that thrives for everybody. And that's a long-term vision. That breaks through the 4-year cycle of electoral cycles, of political power. It breaks through the reporting requirements of companies, of quarterly reports, where the bottom line has to be black, there can be no red. Anything that is short term is riddled with unanticipated consequences. Because if you're going to make the bottom line of profit, regardless of the consequences, then yes, you might have the profit, but you will be trashing the planet, or you will be negatively impacting communities and people and the health of other people. So again, how can we do long-term thinking, create solutions that are long-term, and then think back, and this is backcasting or reverse engineering to today, by putting the strategic plan first, thinking about the end result, the outcome. What is it we want to see at the end of 10, 15, 20, 100 years? Then that will tell us, well, then if we want to reach that situation, tomorrow we need to do this, and the day after we need to do that. And it all begins with the right type of conversation. And by doing this and using triple loop learning, that is really rethinking who we are, we can create third order change. Third order change is redesigning everything that we do and replacing the old systems with new ones. And doing this collectively will allow us to then prototype and then scale up, as I was talking about before, to actually reach the triple top line rather than the triple bottom line. So this process is unending. It's iterative. It's the infinity symbol is the idea is that we never get to that state of perfection. It's always a journey in that direction. So don't feel bad about, I'm not there yet. I'm never going to be there. But if we do things in the right way, we will see that evolution, that ascension towards better things, and we will be able to leave a legacy behind. And so that's why leadership is purpose-driven, shared, and iterative. We come back again and again. And how we make decisions is with the arrows here around the framework, which is represented by this. This is what we call circular systems of collaboration. Hierarchy cannot exist in regeneration. We have to operate in horizontal systems of power where everybody has an equal voice. In the end, we can organize ourselves in ways where people have a higher function, people can be an owner, but until we have authentic engagement and participation, one of the things we talk about is if you want to improve the quality of the air and the health of a building, the person that needs to be at the conference table, the conference table, needs to be the janitor and the cleaning folks, because they're the ones that are actually putting caustic chemicals into the water they use to clean. So they need to have a voice at the table for that conversation as much as the CEO or the head of HR or the head of budget. And it's not just a management issue, it's a leadership issue. And so it's not just a budget issue. Can you use green cleaning products in order to improve the health and eventually the productivity of people and the profit of a company? You can do things better and actually increase profit, even if you're spending more, because you're increasing people's retention and actual commitment and their physical as well as emotional health in an organization by having clean and healthy buildings. So there's so many different areas where all of this comes together. And that's enough of me talking. Questions? Does that make sense? So your task here for the project is, can you begin to use these concepts? And what is the thing that gets in the way of all of this? What is it that makes it impossible for us to become regenerative? That's a question for the floor. Go ahead, Giselle.
I can answer. All of this is interesting, and this entire presentation, I am completely caught up by it because it's a lot of things I've had in my mind, but not had a format of looking at and articulation. But I think one of the things to answer the question that could prevent people or prevent us from achieving regenerative type leadership mentally is personalities and the decision to want to remain in profit, one, and people's general desires. Not everybody will be thinking this way or
Sure.
see it this way. I think that could be one of the top ones.
That's a great point. Actually, next we're going to be looking at different types of conversation. Go ahead, Dean.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, this framework really interests me, and I can relate to a lot of things you've talked about, but this takes it to a whole new level. So in purposes of my world, in working in leading a police department, where we have a senior leadership team, obviously like many other companies, corporations, private, public, that oversees many different functions of the organization, from operations to investigations to administration, HR, etc. And what I see in my senior leadership team is, to your question here, what would get in the way of this? It would be people's personal agendas in terms of trying to look at their next move for their sole purpose of success, whether it be promotion or whatever, or just seeing things differently. So my senior leadership team, again, looks after each leader looks after a division in the organization. So for example, our operations division, if that leader is just simply looking at what is going to benefit operations and not consider the impacts to the administrative division or the HR division or the community impacts from that services being delivered, that would be a breakdown from what I understand this framework to be. That would be a breakdown in developing a regenerative leadership model here.
Great point. And you bring up key issues: self-interest, personality. These are all things, again, that are not part of the pure consciousness. The regenerative leader there has failed, in a sense, to be able to get people to set that aside in order to address the bigger purpose, the bigger shared purpose. That's the real challenge. And it can be frightening. I mean, Dean, in your environment, talking about love might not be easy. Talking about enjoying our company together in order to create a safer community that can prosper, that might not be the topics that are on people's minds. And all of these are reflected in, sorry, Dean, you wanted to say something else?
Oh yeah, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but
No, no, go ahead.
just to your point there, absolutely. And my leadership style, I try and bring in the heart. I use the word heart, lead from the heart and the mind.
Good.
And actually, when I hire every brand new employee, whether it be a sworn police officer or a civilian support worker, when they're hired, I actually give them a book on emotional intelligence and talk about what that means in terms of not only how we communicate and make people feel, but how we process our own emotions, stay healthy. So these are little pieces that I do to try and bring in, like you say, that the love of purpose rather than the mechanical objective way of looking at that.
This goes back to where there's nobody outside of your organization that can solve the problem for you. You are the one who knows the people and the language you need to use to bring them on board. So you know where the minefields are mentally and ideologically, the principles, the values of the people that surround you. And obviously, you try to be careful about who you bring in, because that is a key leadership skill, bringing in the right people, as Jim Collins would have said, getting the right people on the bus before you even start. And this is really important. However, we all have issues. And the very simple thing the label for everything that you are mentioning here is this. So if you can identify that label, so, oh, this person is coming from self-interest, from their own purpose, without a collective or shared purpose, I'm not doing my job of helping them see that there is something bigger here where their self-interest will be satisfied while we're doing something that is collective, that actually gives the reason for the existence of this organization. Not, for example, you mentioned promotion. Promotion is not about the organization, it's about self-interest. However, if promotion is given due to the fact that somebody actually fulfilled the purpose of the organization to such a point that they were promoted, then there is an alignment of purposes there. And that needs to be understood by the people. Otherwise, their ego, if they're not listened to, is going to run away with them, and they're going to be trying to get promotion by backstabbing others, by taking credit for things that they've not done, by lying. I mean, we all begin to fall into the tricks and traps of how do we perform outside of working from the heart, particularly if we don't feel that we are being listened to. So leadership is also about that deep listening. Promotion is a consequence of something else. Again, it's part of a process, not the end result, not the desired outcome. So again, I always quote this, learning to check our egos and logos at the door, because power is also potentially contaminated by ego. So in your case, Dean, you have power. You have a position of authority.
Which is just.
Sorry, Amanda. Can you mute yourself, Amanda?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. If you have a question, just raise your hand.
No, sorry.
So power is, again, one of the things that allows us to not listen to other people, to know what we need to do, and this is how we're going to get it done, and not to have everybody at the table. And so when we talk about having people at the table of the solution, one thing I would recommend for everybody is the people that must be at your design table for this design of the solution. And I want you to think about just going back to Dean, consider how you're actually going to bring bears to your table and how you're going to bring the unborn to your table. Because all decisions that you make in your little office, closed off from everything else, is going to have an impact on the natural environment. So our multiple stakeholder engagement, when we talk of the list of those who should be at the design table for the solution, need to be future generations who don't have a voice unless we give it to them. What would they want and like to see as a result of the work you do? And what about the living animal kingdom and the trees? What would they want if they had a voice? What would they ask of you? So think about all of these invisible stakeholders that we obviously often do not consider in the decisions that we make. So, questions or comments? Let me unshare. Any thoughts? Do any of you have an initial idea about a project that you are considering doing or improving the work that you do? Joe, we haven't heard from you today. Anything you'd like to share?
All right, thank you. Quite an intriguing conversation. So what I wanted to comment on, I think you've already touched it, because I wanted to bring up the element of regenerative leadership being inversely proportional to ego in response to the moment.
Yep. And if that's an interesting equation. So what does that make you think?
I'll go back to what I commented on the forum, because I think I was looking at leadership in general, regenerative leadership being being related to change management.
Okay.
And yeah, and so doing there comes leaders or leadership in general, be it from the hierarchical kind or just from an individual perspective as a leader in our daily lives and roles. So I was looking at the element that regenerative leadership is intertwined with change management, because whether we like it or not, I think sometimes it's the leaders, due to the leaders that we have, they can facilitate that process of say regeneration, or they can hinder, they can be a bottleneck, considering our say current affairs or current state of the world and things like that. So yeah, in short, I would say I don't know whether it's made any sense or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, next week we're going to be talking about what Dr. Sharma calls the four fields of conversation. How do we get away from the ego-driven conversations, what Dean was saying about agendas, self-interest, or reporting back to my constituency, to who's put me at this table that I have to respond to. And obviously we see it in politics, which is very adversarial and competitive. Otto Schammer also talks about how competition in the corporate world in the 21st century is no longer viable. Corporations must learn how to collaborate, because collaboration is going to be the driver of profit in the future, not competition. And finding ways where we can do that, for example, as I mentioned before, in circular industries. How does Coca-Cola work with the World Wildlife Fund, for example? And here's a question for you. What might there be in common, a shared purpose between Coca-Cola and the World Wildlife Foundation, where these two organizations normally hate each other because obviously the World Wildlife Fund tries to block Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola needs to get to where the World Wildlife Fund actually operates in order to do its job. So what could there be something that could bring them all together to sit at the same table? and do something together. And they've been doing this, actually.
Clean water.
And this is, go ahead, Annie.
Sorry, I just thought clean water.
Yes, that is absolutely it. The one product that they both share that are important to both, key or essential to both, is water. And the World Wildlife Foundation and Coca-Cola have sat down in places like China to figure out how to exploit natural water reserves in such a way that Coca-Cola leaves the place better than when it went in. And then they benefit from the help of scientists in the WWF to help them figure out the environmental impacts, preservation, conservation, and how to leave those communities better off than when they went in. And there's all of these collaborations occurring around the world between mega corporations, international corporations, with communities and nonprofits in order to do that. So cement corporations in France, nuclear power stations, all sorts of organizations that are creating virtually unheard of relationships or partnerships in order to be able to do the work of building products and yet enhancing and enriching the quality of the natural and social environment of where they go. So companies that have this sustainability vision, as Giselle's company does, have this vision of where we do things that actually create beautiful products that are healthy for us, they're healthy for the environment, and actually empower and create prosperity in our communities. So these are always the three legs of that stool. If every decision we make considers everything that is going to happen based on what we do, then we do have the possibility of making change happen. And that would be effective change management, Joe. So from a regenerative leadership perspective, your change management initiative would actually reach that desirable future. Go ahead, Joe.
All right, thank you once again. So I was also looking at the current developments of BP backrolling or backtracking some of their climate commitments. So I would also relate it to the fact of regenerative leadership being related to consciousness, which in a way I would say they were committed, but there wasn't really, it wasn't up to the, it wasn't as deep to the level of consciousness. So yeah, that's one thing that I wanted to point out, which is also, which we could also relate to, say, the element of leadership, how important leadership is in helping to deliver some of the, say, sustainability in short.
Right. So you bring up a really important point. And one of the things that I've mentioned, actually, I have a resource here, and I responded to one of you this morning about how these global partnerships are not working because they are agenda driven. And therefore, governments like the United States pull out of the Conference of the Parties, the climate change agreements, and because the consciousness is not there. So, I don't know if you're familiar with it, and let me pull it up here. I believe I've got it somewhere around here. Yes. So the Conference of the Parties, the climate change agreements, and let me share, in week 2, I have this resource. What is happening is that individuals are taking the initiative and beginning to do different things. And here we call, this is the conferences of the people. So instead of going to conferences, we create conferences everywhere we go. So we bring the conferences to you. You create the conference where you discuss. So you can actually look at this this resource here on week 2 about how we can't seem to, after 27 years, COP conferences are not working. We've been talking about all of these things. We've created the desired temperature change that is the limit, the threshold. We've already passed that 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. We can't seem to come together in order to make that happen. Countries now move away from, in the United States, the latest address to the nation was drill, baby, drill. So we're going back to fossil fuels as the source of prosperity with no concern for the unintended consequence. So we need to take the power back to the people. This is one initiative. Another is, if you're not familiar with it, it's the transition movement. Not that one. Another very interesting effort is the network. Here we go. So now for about 25 to 30 years, there's been these initiatives in towns and villages, beginning in England, to actually consider how to build better communities through open agendas, through open dialogue, bringing people together to have a conversation about nothing and everything, in order to then design entirely new ways of doing things. There are towns, for example, that created their own currency. So now they have their own paper money and their own economy. So they've created a separate economy from the economy of the country. Their communities have gone entirely off the grid. So people have made different decisions about how to live and how to operate, how to work, based on conversations at that level. So these are models that you can explore, and there's lots of these and ways that you can organize. So this could be a strategy or a model that you might think about. How do you bring these principles into your own project? And the Transition Network is one of those models that might give you some ideas as to how to work with your community, how to work within your company or within your organization, within your school, within your university, within your municipality, within a police department. So how do you engage the entire community in a conversation around, this is where we are, where is it that we want to go, and what is it that we can do together to make that happen? But it does require the leadership to help people leave their egos and their logos at the door. Inside this conversation, we do not have differences in power. We do not have stronger or more dominant voices. And we're considering long-term impacts of our decisions. So we want to make sure that we get to those 10, 50 years with an impeccable plan of action. That might require some rethinking of what we do today. And we're now at 2 minutes past the time, so we've taken a lot of time on this. So any questions, comments? My suggestion to you, thank you, Joe, for the appreciation. I appreciate you guys. Remember, this is about you. All of these things that I'm sharing are only ideas. They're useless until you can see how you can translate them into something that you can do for yourself and your particular type of group. So what I'm looking forward to seeing over the next few days is for you to share with me what it is that you might want to do and why, so we can get the conversation going about the how. Because everything I'm talking about here is process. You decide what you want to do. I'll try to help with some of these tools and skills and frameworks of seeing if you can create a process that can actually go further in terms of designing a prototype that you can then turn into your own personal regenerative leadership model that is uniquely yours, because you are unique. You can't just copy and paste all of these things into what you do and make it work. It won't happen. It has to be adjusted to what you understand from your environment in order to make it work. And that's the next step. So that's why I'm asking you to just a few ideas of what it is that you'd like to do, or if you're doing something already, how you'd like to shift that, because I'm sure none of you are 100% satisfied with how things are going. Because if you are, you wouldn't be here. And hopefully we can find some ideas that can help you move the needle just that little bit further. And don't worry, don't be afraid that if you realize it's not going to happen in your organization, maybe do something somewhere else. Create a small project outside of your organization to build your model so that you learn the tricks of the trade of the regenerative leader before you expose yourself in maybe a more hostile environment or a more toxic environment. So it might be just a conversation with 2 or 3 people somewhere else where you can actually get something going and really see how this works. You can kick the tires to see if this thing works before you expose yourself in a more public way where you might be more exposed. Because this does take courage, it does take follow through, and it's not easy. Questions or thoughts before we sign off? All right. Food. Have I given you some food for thought? Okay. That's the intent. And hopefully this will come back and you'll share some, email me, whatever. Don't be embarrassed about sharing even silly things. If you feel it's silly, it's not silly. I'm sure it'll be something that's true to you, coming from you, and anything you come up with is worth listening to. So I'll be glad to hear what you have to share. So do watch the Majora Carta video from week 2. Do get into frameworks and tools next week, week 3, where we're going to begin to unpack some of these things into more practical skills and tools, and looking at the design process, so that can help you build your own design of solutions. But just think about that initial conversation that you want to have with somebody else, maybe just one other person, about how can we do things better around here. Somebody that you trust and who trusts you, who won't actually sort of, look at you and then unfriend you from Facebook or, drop you from their contact list. And if you don't have anybody, well, do it in the mirror in the bathroom, okay? But just get going with starting to generate some conversations around things that you would like to accomplish. Okay? All right, guys. Well, thank you for listening. There's been a lot of me. Next week, hopefully, it'll be a lot more you than me. So try to watch the recording of the frameworks and tools. Dean, you wanted to say something to sign off?
I was just going to say thank you very much. Yeah, I really enjoyed today's session.
Okay, great. And thank you all. All right. Have a great week and looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.